In this lecture, we're going to introduce the endocrine system. The endocrine system is like a secondary control system for the body. The nervous system is very fast, and so that typically handles rapid response items. But the endocrine system also sends signals, and it uses chemical messengers or hormones to do that, and they're released into the blood. Hormones control several major processes. Those processes include reproduction, growth and development, the mobilization of body defenses in the immune system, maintenance of much of homeostasis, and the regulation of metabolism. A hormone is a chemical, and they're produced by specialized cells that are usually in structures we call glands. Cells secrete hormones into the extracellular fluid so that they escape the cell, and then they can go have target or work on target cells on other cells. They usually travel through the bloodstream, and the hormones regulate the activity of other cells. So one cell secretes a chemical that impacts the activity of a different cell. Hormones can be made of a few different types of molecules. So some hormones are made of amino acids, so they're protein-based hormones. So that could include proteins, peptides, or amines. Steroids are also a molecule that is used as a hormone. They are made from cholesterol molecules. And then prostaglandins are chemicals that can be used as hormones made from highly active lipids. Hormones are targeted, meaning that they only affect certain tissues or organs. Those target cells have to have specific protein receptors in order to respond to the signal that is being sent by a hormone. And then when the hormone binds to that protein, it alters the cellular activity inside of the cell. Hormones can cause a variety of different impacts on the cell. So they can change the permeability of the plasma membrane or the electrical state, so they can allow ions in and out or something like that. They might also stimulate the synthesis of proteins, such as enzymes, so they can increase the production of an enzyme. They might also activate or inactivate an enzyme, so they can prevent an enzyme from doing its work or stimulate it to do more of its work. They can also stimulate mitosis or cell division and promote secretory activity. So a hormone can cause another cell to produce something else it secretes, which could be another hormone. So some hormone-producing cells can act on other hormone-producing cells to increase their output. Hormones impact their target cells in a couple of ways. They can either do direct gene activation in a cell or go through something called the second messenger system. When a hormone participates in direct gene activation, it diffuses through the plasma membrane of the target cell, and then the hormone actually enters the nucleus of that cell. There, it can bind to a specific protein within the nucleus, and it can also bind to specific sites on the cell's DNA. And by activating genes in the DNA, it can result in the synthesis of new proteins. And so the hormone can activate the DNA to produce specific proteins, and those proteins can potentially change the activity of the cell. Over the next several slides, we'll go through how these steroid hormones can activate the production of or the copying of a gene in a cell. First, the steroid hormone has to enter the cell. So here you can see our steroid hormone, and then it's going to diffuse across the cell membrane. It's going to enter the nucleus through into the nuclear pores, and then it's going to bind to a protein. Here you can see the protein receptor, and this is the molecule that the steroid is going to bind to. And once those two molecules are bound together, they can act on the DNA. So here you can see the hormone receptor complex. So that's that protein plus the hormone working together, and they are going to act on the DNA of the cell. When a hormone acts on the DNA, it's going to activate the copying of a specific gene. And remember that genes, when they're copied, are copied into a molecule called mRNA. And you can see that here. And that's the molecule that actually helps with protein production directly. So here you can see we have our mRNA molecule that's been produced. The mRNA molecule is a short strand of nucleotides that only contains the instructions for a specific protein. And that molecule is able to leave the cell to help with protein production. In step 6 here, you can see the protein is being produced. So we have our mRNA strand, which is blue, and that's being copied by the ribosomes, and they're producing this new protein here, and this is the product of this whole process, and that was the intention of the cell, to produce that when acted upon by our initial hormone. The other way that hormones send their messages to cells is through the second messenger system. And so these are typically non-steroidal hormones. And here the hormones bind to a membrane receptor on the outside of the cell rather than entering the cell itself. They set off a series of reactions that activate an enzyme inside of the cell. They can catalyze a reaction that produces a second messenger molecule. An example would be CAMP or CAMP. And it oversees additional intracellular changes that promote their specific response, because each hormone that your body produces has a specific response that acts on specific cells. So over the next few slides, we can go over how that second messenger system works. The first thing that has to happen is that our non-steroid hormone, which is called the first messenger, binds to this receptor protein that is on the cell membrane. When that binding occurs, it activates an enzyme, which is the second step of this process. The enzyme, when activated, allows ATP to energize our second messenger molecule. So in this example, we're using CAMP. Our energized second messenger can have an effect on cellular function. So it perhaps could be that it breaks down glycogen, which is releasing glucose molecules from a glycogen sugar. Hormone levels in your blood have to be regulated, and this is typically maintained by a negative feedback loop. So if a stimulus or low hormone level in the blood occurs, it triggers the release of more hormone. And then the hormone release stops once you have reached an appropriate level in the bloodstream. So when hormone levels go down, then the organ that produces that hormone is stimulated to produce more of that hormone until the set point is released or reached, and then the hormone is stopped being produced. Endocrine glands are the organs that produce hormones, and they're usually activated by other hormones. So, for example, the anterior pituitary hormones travel to target glands like your thyroid, and they prompt the release of a particular hormone, such as thyroid hormone. So here you can see, for example, the hypothalamus secretes a hormone, and that stimulates the anterior pituitary gland, which releases a separate hormone, and that can act on the thyroid gland, the adrenal cortex, or the testes, for example, and those can stimulate other endocrine glands to secrete hormones. So many times, one endocrine gland can act on one or more other endocrine glands. But hormones are not the only thing that can affect endocrine glands. Some endocrine glands are impacted by things that are in your bloodstream. So, for example, ions might influence hormone production. And this is called a humoral stimuli or stimulus. So example here would be like the parathyroid hormone and calcitonin are produced in response to changing levels of blood calcium. So the amount of calcium that is being carried in your bloodstream causes a hormonal response rather than having a hormone cause a different hormonal response. Another example would be like the production of insulin. Remember, that's the hormone that pushes blood sugar into your cells. If the blood sugar level changes, then insulin production will also change. There are cells, for example, in your thyroid that detect the level of calcium ions that are dissolved in your blood. And if calcium levels get low, then the parathyroid glands can produce parathyroid hormone, and so that is in response to calcium levels rather than in response to another hormone. And hormones can also be stimulated by your nervous system. And so an example would be like the release of norepinephrine or epinephrine by the adrenal glands because of a nervous impulse. So your central nervous system responds to external stimuli. And if, for example, you were walking to school someday and you were being chased by a mountain lion, your brain would experience that and you would either have a fight or a flight response. And so your brain has an area called the preganglionic sympathetic fiber that is going to stimulate the adrenal medulla cells. So those cells produce epinephrine and norepinephrine, which is that fight or flight hormone That's going to allow you to either run away really fast or use all of the strength that you have to fight off your mountain lion.